Make sure to use the code NFL100FP on busr.com for 100% free play on $100 deposits or more. All right, guys, here's the show.
Hey guys, welcome into the Get the Discharge podcast presented by the Blue Air Podcast Network. My name is Steven. I'm your host. Happy to be joined by my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good today, except for the fact that Chip Kelly won a big game. So that sucks.
Yeah, it was a great game, though. It was a lot of fun to watch. Tyler, your USC Trojans escaped. They beat who did they play yesterday? I can't even remember right now. San Jose State. They beat San Jose State. So that was kind of fun to watch, I guess. But how you doing today, man?
Didn't watch it, but I was able to watch the score, and they won, and that's all that matters. So there's that. So we are Utah and USC 1-1 or 1-0 each, headed for
Rutgers is 1-0 too, baby. Don't forget it.
We're talking about like schools that matter here. So USC and Utah are both 1-0, and I can't wait to see them.
Did you score 60 points? I don't think you scored 60 points.
Who Rutgers play?
Temple.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's about the same level as San Jose State and Weber State.
Good for you guys. I'm really proud of you,
Damian
man.
Lillard school.
Yeah, the Damian Lillard school. We were just talking about how they do have a good football program, but it is what it is. Your first week of the game, the first game of the year, you just got to escape, win, take care of business, and move on because the first week is always a disaster. Okay, so we have a great show planned for you guys today. We're going to talk about how we are looking at the AFC as a whole in terms of tiers. We're also going to talk about some things that potentially changed our minds during training camp and preseason or didn't change our minds. And we also have an interview with Jeff Miller. So as always, the audio version is going to happen right after this. The video version of that is going to be separate. So please go check that out. I had a great conversation with Jeff Miller of the LA Times. And here is the audio version. All right, so let's get into some news and notes before we jump into the AFC tiers and some other things that changed our mind throughout the preseason. First and foremost, Ryan Smith was activated off the COVID list. And in a corresponding move, the Chargers waived Keemon Hall. I know there was some speculation, particularly by us, that the Chargers could potentially look at placing Ryan Smith on injured reserve. They could still do that. And then he would have to miss the first 3 games at least. But for now, it looks like he is back at practice. So we have not received a true update on the core injury, and we hope to do that soon. So, Tyler, what did you make of the decision to kind of keep Keemon Hall around and then waive him in favor of Ryan Smith?
It was expected, is what all 3 of us thought was going to happen, that they were going to activate him at some point and Hall would go down. I was hoping Hall would stick around, but again, they want to keep other guys. So it is what it is. So all of it is just expected, and it's solid timing for the team. I think now he's available for what they brought him in for, and it just adds some veteran leadership to a group that is experiencing a lot of turnover. So happy to have him around. I hope he lives up to what they signed him for.
Yeah, I think it does kind of stink for Maryland Hall to have the exhilaration of making the 53-man roster and then, be told that, hey, you're going to the practice questions a little easier in an orderly fashion. I would like that. But I like the idea of Ryan Smith. I mean, you have to have him on the roster just for special teams, right? I mean, that's what Staley's been saying for the last month in pretty much every interview. You need him as your kind of special teams gunner, if you will. And that's pretty much it. Like, Keemon Hall, I think, was the most consistent of those sort of lower tier corners on the roster in the preseason. And so that's why he kind of deserved to make the roster. But ultimately, I don't think there was justification to be made for keeping him over Ryan Smith. And, I think they're better right now at corner anyway, because they do have 6. At first, they had 7 on the roster, which I was like, okay, this is overkill. But then they wave Faison and they bring in Marshall from Denver. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. So I think the roster makes a little bit more sense now after a lot of these moves. Right. And I'm excited to see what Ryan Smith can do in special teams.
Yeah, the balance of corners and safety was always an interesting thing for me because, you look at, the other places where this Vic Fangio style defense has been, and they've almost always have had like an equal balance of like 5 safeties, 5 corners. and then they kind of just rotate people around. So like, with Chris Harris playing multiple positions, and Trey Marshall playing multiple positions, and Mark Webb playing multiple positions. So it just was kind of interesting to me that like we're looking at 6 or 7 corners and 4 safeties. Now it's even at 5 and 6, more even, I should say. The other thing I wanted to mention too is just kind of the special teams conversation here, because Brandon Faison was their leading special teams tackler last year, and he's on the practice squad now. And so they really have overhauled the entire unit. Of course, we'll see, with Tristan Vizcaino. Daniel Popper is Vizcaino, by the way. He did say that on his YouTube show. So looks like we're all rolling with Vizcaino from now on. But I was listening to the Athletic Football Show, and Robert Mays and Mike Sando were talking about the Arizona Cardinals special teams unit. And I did tweet this, but I wanted to bring it up here, just kind of get your guys' thoughts as well, because Jeff Rogers is their special teams coordinator. He's been there since 2018. He was with the Chicago Bears before that, and he was with the Denver Broncos before that. And his star pupil the entire time essentially has been Darius Swinton. So in between the jobs where Swinton was special teams coordinator for the Niners and I think someone else, he was working with Jeff Rogers. And the point that was made on the Athletic Football Show was that the previous year before they hired Jeff Rogers, the Cardinals were tied for 29th in special teams DVO rankings. Like they were bottom of the league pretty consistently, as have the Chargers been. And in Rogers' first year in Arizona, they went all the way up to 11th in special teams DVOA. They've hovered kind of between that 8 to 15 range pretty consistently over the last 3 years. And so I was just kind of like thinking about it, like realistically, how far up can the Darius Swinton take this unit in his first season? Because everything is different except for Ty Long. Every other person that's going to play special teams is different. You can make, obviously for game neighbors too, but you have different gunners, you have a different kicker, you have a different long snapper. Everything on this team has been kind of overhauled. So I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on basically how much can this team improve in Darius Swinton's first year. Tyler, we'll start with you on that one first.
That's a tough one to gauge because I just haven't seen enough yet. Not enough live reps. Ryan Smith is just now getting activated. Hard to tell exactly how far they can go. But I will say they are going to go as far as they possibly could this season, whether that's 10 spots, 28 spots, whatever. I think they're going to go as far as they can because they spent a lot of time at training camp on special teams. And then they spent a lot of money or added a lot of players or kept a lot of players who are basically there to be backups, but also just special teams guys. And so I don't think I've ever seen a team focus so hard on special teams in 1 year with all of this turnover, all these additions. So I do think they can go as far as they possibly can. I just don't know how far that is just yet because I don't really have any way to gauge them yet because I haven't seen a consistent unit. I haven't seen the same players on the field at the same time for an entire game. Half those guys that we saw in the preseason are gone. Vizcaino, I don't know what to make of him, but I do think he'll give them a boost in special teams DVOA. I don't know how the field goal kicking will do, but I do think the kickoff returns will be a little bit better just because he's that much more powerful of a leg. So we'll see how it turns out, but I can't gauge how far they're going to go. But I do know that they will go as far as they possibly can because they've placed so much emphasis on the special teams unit.
I tend to think they'll have a better second half of the season when it comes to special teams than first half, just because it seems like they're still going to be experimenting with things, right? I mean, if you look at KJ Hill, for example, they've said, hey, KJ Hill's our starting punt returner, but you pretty much heard every reporter say, well, they say that, but we'll see how long that lasts, right?
Right.
If he's not good, then they'll replace him with somebody else. You have like 3 guys who are in contention to kick return. We think it's going to be Nasir Adderley, but you also have Larry Roundtree in the mix and other guys. So I think from a return standpoint, you look at them and just say that's kind of a lot of stuff up in the air. As far as punt coverage and kick coverage, I thought punt coverage looked very rough in the preseason, but that's also because it's supposed to, right? Like, it's time to get those issues ironed out now as opposed to later. And so plus, a lot of the guys who should be on special teams, weren't playing by the time we hit week 3. Right.
Right.
So I think that that's important to note as well. So, it's kind of a mystery. A lot of it obviously hinges on how Vizcaino is as a field goal kicker. if he's going to be consistent throughout the whole year and at least, hit 80% of his field goals, then, the outlook for the special teams hits at least top 15 in the league. If, he's going to get cut after week 6, then, it's going to plummet it's going to plummet pretty significantly. So that's kind of going to be one major turning point. But I think the big areas are going to be punt coverage and specifically returning. And like Tyler said, I just don't know if we know enough as of now. Obviously, Staley has put a priority on special teams, and every reporter has talked death about, the focus he puts on that in practice, more so than Anthony Lynn or really any previous Chargers coach. So, I'm curious to see what it'll be like, but it's also, still too early to tell what the actual quality will be, even though Staley has put this emphasis on it.
Yeah, I feel in terms of the improvement, I feel pretty similarly about, the offensive line and the special teams, where I think like at minimum, they'll be kind of in like the low 20s range in DVOA for offensive line. You can talk about all the different kind of rankings and metrics there are, but I feel pretty comfortable that those units will be kind of hovering around the low 20s, but the potential to be more than that. Like if Brian Bulaga plays 14, 15, 16, 17 games, like the offensive line is going to be better, right? And same with the special teams. Like I think they'll be kind of in that low 20s range. But if Tristan Vizcaino is the kicker who Darius Swinton believes he is going to be, then the Chargers special team ceiling is that much higher. So it was just an interesting thing because Jeff, like you look at all these coaches and how kind of the trickle down effect that happens with, their proteges. And I was just kind of interested in seeing like, okay, so Darius Swinton has been with Jeff Rodgers for 6-7 years, and Jeff Rodgers has had all this great success in Chicago and now Arizona. And I think we all agree that Darius Swinton is definitely an upgrade over George Stewart, and seems like a very significant one. But yeah, I was just curious about your guys' thoughts there. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, or we wanted to talk about rather, was the Chargers selection of their team captains. Just going down the list, they have Keenan Allen, Joey Bosa, Austin Eckler, Justin Herbert, Derwin James, Linval Joseph, Corey Linsley, and Ty Long as the special teams captain. So a bunch of people have been commenting, right? Like a lot of teams do 5, some teams do 8. The Chargers have 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the Chargers have 8. So that's kind of a newer thing. But Alex, we'll start with you. What'd you make of the Chargers selection of their team captains this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they selected 8, they don't have to select a specific number. It's just, whoever gets the most votes in that team meeting, right? And whoever meets a certain threshold. So, I think the fact that they have all those guys that they believe in is good. Justin Herbert making it in his second year is cool. Somebody like Corey Linsley making it in his first year on the team, I think is really noteworthy. And then, of course, you have Austin Eckler and Derwin James and the guys who are sort of, next man up in terms of leadership, right? Because we look at what it was last year, right? It was Tyrod Taylor, Marquise Pouncey, Hunter Henry, Casey Hayward, Melvin Ingram as the captains. 5 guys who were veterans with the Chargers for quite a long time, and 5 guys who are no longer here. And so that sort of led to this power vacuum where you just have guys that are going to naturally become the leaders on the team one way or another. And I think you saw it, right? Like the average fan wouldn't say, hey, Ty Long is a leader, right? In the way that we think of maybe Derwin James, but a lot of guys respect him in the locker room, right? And so that's why, he's on there. And you think about Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert in that way as well. So I am pretty okay with this captain's list. It seems kind of like the guys most people would select. And, we'll talk about Justin Herbert's Mina Kimes article in a minute. But, I do think there's that kind of quiet, leadership nature where, you guys have guys like Bosa and Herbert who are more introverted, but, can still lead the team and rally the guys.
I love seeing Ty Long make it. I think he deserves it just for surviving and still having a pulse after last year's blocking. But I think the team really did respect him last year after he, I believe, was a pretty vocal guy during the social movement and social change movements and whatnot. And so obviously that held a lot of weight in the team. And for him to go from, just the punter to a captain of the team is really cool. And so good for him. I think that's really cool. I love seeing Eckler make the list because I think Lynn was trying to push him towards that leadership role. At some point, I think he made a speech to the team, if not at least the rookies. And he's always talking to undrafted free agents. Hey, here's what you need to do. Here's what I did. Hang in there, yada, yada. So it's nice to see Eckler actually become a captain. And overall, I think like Alex pointed out, they've tended to go either old heads or maybe just only vocal rah-rah leaders before. But I do think they have a good mix now of lead, rah-rah guys, sure, vocal guys, sure, but also lead by example guys. Like Joey Bosa, we've seen him be very loud. We've seen him against the Bills be absolutely violent and loud and ridiculous. But he is typically a more reserved guy. This is a guy who loves to kind of just take guys to the side. Hey, do this, try this, whatever, one-on-one sort of things, and then lead by example on the field. Same thing with Herbert, Mr. Cart Putbacker. He is not exactly the loudest guy, but you know what? He leads by example, and I love that. So the team has a really, really good mix. I love they have 8 captains, and really you could see 7 or 8 Pro Bowl players on this list as it's like every guy is deserving. Like the Raiders, they have their fullback as one of the captains. I'm not saying he's not a good leader, but like I don't think that guy's going to make the Pro Bowl anytime soon.
Right.
So we'll see. But it's really cool to see 8 Chargers who are very deserving for either their play or who they are as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about Tai Long, typically like every team selects a special teams captain, right? But even then, like the special teams guys are generally kind of like isolated from the team. But Tai Long is everywhere. Like during practice, he's up around. He's talking with the defense. He's talking with the offense. He really does a great job of like making sure that he's a part of the team, which goes a long way. Of course, you mentioned the social justice thing. He was one of, I think he was like the second no, not the second. He was like the third or fourth guy when the Chargers had the canceled scrimmage. Tai Long was one of the guys who talked on TV. So it's pretty clear that they respect him, and I'm happy for him. I'm pretty sure he was a captain last year, so I think he's the only holdover from last year, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't think he was. No, it was just Henry, Ingram, Pouncey, Tyrod. Don't remember the 5th one off the top of my. I just said the 5th one, and I've already forgotten it.
Well, I know that Casey Hayward was one.
He wasn't captain last week.
Maybe he just was
Casey Hayward. That's the 5th one. Mm-hmm.
Maybe Tai Long was just like a game captain a couple times then or something like that. Anyways, regardless, happy for him. And I do agree. I like the balance of kind of like the introverts and the loud guys. Like I think Austin Eckler and Linval Joseph are probably going to be like the rah-rah guys this year, and of course Derwin James. And then you have, even Keenan Allen's a little bit introverted too. He talks some trash, but he's never really been like the rah-rah leader type, I think. So I think they have a good balance of guys like that as well. And then like the Justin Herbert thing is so funny to me because everything we heard in the leading up to the draft is that he's not a good leader. He can't lead a locker room. He can't command a team. And then he's a captain in his second year. So I don't think it was this way, but I love that, it was kind of another suck it message to everybody else who has doubted him that he gets to be a team captain in year 2. So big fan of that decision as well.
Real quick, Steven, to your point, Long was a captain. It looks like in October he became a captain, so that's possibly because of injuries or something. But just one quick note from the article from Chris Harry. It says that since the day that they had that canceled scrimmage, Long was in weekly meetings with Lynn and several of his teammates to discuss how they can enact positive change. He's also doing his part to enhance the lives of children with special needs, which is true. If you look at his charities, he absolutely does that. So a really great guy that deserves a captain role for sure.
There we go. All right, let's talk about that Mina Kimes article, which was really fantastic. It definitely, was a longer profile, but highly recommend you go check out the whole thing. Of course, everybody who has read it is kind of having fun with the whole grocery cart thing between him and Gabe Neighbors, which apparently is the only time that Justin Herbert has lost his temper, if you will. But I just think it was so cool to see, we've seen a few national articles about the Chargers this year. Robert Mays had another one about the Chargers offense, but to have such an in-depth profile like this for Justin Herbert, I think really does volumes for the team and for his own brand, right? I think Mina Kimes did such a great job of outlining who he is and how he can be successful both on the field and off the field. And everybody kind of focused in on the grocery cart thing. But the other thing that really kind of stood out to me is when they were at the golf tournament and all the Chargers players are up, doing a karaoke song. and Justin Herbert just kind of like fades back into the background. And then I think she said it was Scott Questenberry like grabbed him and put him back in the front. So it was a good day for introverts, man. And I think it really just shined, a very positive note on who Justin Herbert is.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things, first, I guess we should start with the grocery cart thing. I'm sorry to Justin Herbert, but I completely side with Gabe Neighbors in that debate of shopping carts. Look, so some supermarkets, I think the case is that there are those like shopping cart holders like in the parking lot, but the ones that make you walk like all the way back and they don't have the shopping cart holders. Listen, in theory, I should be like a Justin Herbert, but in practice, I'm very much a Gabe Neighbors in that regard, and I will not apologize for it. In terms of the article takeaways, I really like the section where Keenan Allen was comparing him with Phillip Rivers, and how Phillip Rivers was kind of yelling every play, but just how Justin Herbert is different in that regard, right? And that is still, two different kinds of leadership, right? Like we mentioned with the rah-rah guys and the introverts. I did think the part that was funny, which is something that we've all had to do, was the part where Mina tells Justin, "Hey, I'm sorry, I overlooked you because of the guys at Oregon, and I had Tua and Burrow higher," and he just like quietly was like, "Yeah, it was big of you to say that, and it took a lot, I'm sure." So I thought that part of it was just like very quietly kind of cocky and funny. But no, I mean the whole article is really great. And there's some really great highlights to it. Obviously, like Steven said, kind of a great day for introverts where, you don't have to be kind of this, loudmouth like a lot of NFL quarterbacks are, particularly a lot of NFL receivers are like that. So I think for quarterbacks to kind of, or for people to kind of grow up with this guy that like maybe they can relate to, whether they're a Chargers fan or not, I think is kind of cool.
I'm on team put your freaking shopping cart back. I love jumping on the shopping cart. What the heck is wrong with you, man? Not only, putting it back is good anyway because it helps other people out. And also, don't you hate turning into a spot where there's a cart right there? It's like, you got to back out and you got to go to the next spot because there's a stupid cart in the way. Hate that.
Yeah, but I do it to somebody else. I hate when it's done to me. See, I'm an asshole.
Well, pay it forward, Alex. Fine. You are the heel. That's fine. But there's nothing more fun than throwing your fiance in the cart and then running and then jumping on the cart and then like going down like you're 5 years old again. Anyway, so I'm team put cart back. Although I think Herbert seems a little bit extreme with some of his cleanliness and whatnot. I don't think I could be friends with him for very long. Not that I'm very messy. It's just I couldn't stand someone who's like everything has to be super clean. So that's the way it is. He's a 4.01 GPA guy, bio major, offensive rookie of the year. So it's working for him so far. So maybe I should try to be more clean as well. I do like the part like Alex mentioned about people not taking so much of the context of what Justin Herbert is experiencing at Oregon into account in their evaluation. To me, especially with how little I was able to study, it was just here's half a dozen games. Here's what I see. Yada yada. That's the grade that I gave him. But so much context goes into it. And then also just even with like Chris Rumph, I also have to take into account where they can go, where they can develop. Because with Chris Rumph, the whole thing was I wasn't a super fan of the college stuff. And if you watch him against Notre Dame, he was getting killed. But you see what he could potentially do. And in the right situations, he could become good. Of course, what does he do? Works out with Khalil Mack, learns from Joey Bosa, and gets drafted by Brandon Staley. And of course, now you see that he's starting to hopefully become better than he ever really possibly could be. So same thing with Herbert. Yeah, there were certain, deficiencies. He wasn't getting past his first read. There were certain issues, but then the summer comes and what do great players do? They work hard, they get better. And of course he got much, much better. And then suddenly week 2 happens and here we are. So it definitely changed my evaluation process for sure. That's why I think I can think more highly of someone like a Justin Fields, where, he was great anyway, but I think some people that were taking away from him and just focusing on what he can't do. I think you want to focus on what they can do and what they could do if they're good players. So Herbert, the whole Herbert experience has been quite a change for all of us as fans, as evaluators, and maybe as people, because now we will advocate for more cart pushing back.
Yeah, now we're all going to go put our carts back where they belong. No. I agree. I'm on team putting carts back as well. But you're right, Tyler. Like, I think the Justin Herbert experience has definitely changed things for me. And it was just a really needed refresher that the sport of football in general is progressive. you know, I was saying on Twitter, like the University of Utah, of course, had to talk about my guys, but you know, they were struggling to in the first half to kind of put Weber State away. And everybody on Twitter, Utah Twitter, was like freaking out, like this team is trash. We're going to lose to Oregon. We're going to lose to USC. Like all of our goals are shot. And it's like, no, like that's not the case, especially for college teams. Like there is growth that happens throughout the season for these teams. And the same thing for, you know, players who are going into the NFL. Like growth happens if they can land in the right spot, which is, you know, kind of what I forgot about Chris Rumph. And so, or Chris Rumph, excuse me. So there is this definitely this culture of like who these players are is who they are going to be. And that's just not the case. And so the Justin Herbert thing, Chris Rumph, like it's good refreshers for everybody to realize like these people can make progress just like anybody else. Like all of us can start a new job and we make progress, or all of us can, you know, get a second degree or, you know, get a promotion and we make progress. And it's the same thing with football players. So that was a good reminder. And I loved his quote about leadership. Like you don't have to be the rah-rah guy to be a good leader. You know, at the end of the day, this is me paraphrasing, but I loved how basically he was saying, people just want to see you be your authentic self. And that really is what it comes down to. And so I know, you know, me and Tyler kind of grew up in this football culture of like, everybody has to be a macho man and everybody has to be a yeller. And I'm so glad that we're moving away from that kind of culture and allowing someone like Justin Herbert, who is not ever going to be a rah-rah guy. He's not ever going to be the guy who's going to tough it out through, you know, an ACL injury or things like that. I'm so glad we're moving past that. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in what LT said in his Hall of Fame speech, where like football is a microcosm of America. Like everybody can come together on a football team, or at least should be able to come together on a football team and have a role and have a place where they feel like they can belong. And so really reading about Justin Herbert's mentality as a leader, like it really resonated with me. And I'm so glad that the Chargers have him and that football is in a place where we can accept a player like him.
Yeah. Well said, Stephen.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the haircuts thing, I totally agree with Justin Herbert. That is
Yes.
where I will side with him.
Yes.
Only 3 haircuts a year at max, and they have
You're
to be
crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my
and
goodness.
also, you don't put your shopping cart back.
Oh my goodness.
Also, Steven, I think that was a very powerful anecdote you just made, but it's still a 7 out of 10 because you shoehorned Utah in there. So I have to take some points off.
I'm sorry. Well, I'll take a 7 out of 10, man. I will. But definitely agree about the haircuts. When I was in high school and college, my best friend Ciale would cut our hair. When we were in high school, we would go up to our locker room like before or after practice, and he would have cut our hair for free. And it wasn't that great. He's become a barber now, so he's a great hair cutter. But I am definitely on the side of don't pay for haircuts unless you absolutely have to. So shout out to that one as well. But not your strength and conditioning coach, man, and not if you're a professional athlete.
For what it's worth, and tying everything in together, haircuts and Herbert. Haircuts, my hairstylist does Herbert's agent's wife's hair. So tying everything together there.
Wait, Herbert's wife's hair?
Herbert's agent's wife's hair.
Okay. I was like, wait, Herbert's not married.
We're plugged in, man.
Yeah. All right, guys. Any other final thoughts here before we move on to our, you know, more broad conversations today?
No.
Great. So we'll move on, and we're going to talk about some things that the preseason and training camp has changed for us, and then we'll wrap up our show today talking about how we view the AFC as a whole and kind of put teams in tiers. So I'll start with something that changed for me in the preseason and training camp is really kind of the aggressive nature of the linebackers. And so that was something that I was very curious about watching unfold for this team, because Brandon Staley didn't really have any solid linebackers last year with the Rams. And so I was kind of curious to see if they would play more of kind of like a helper role and kind of be like cleanup crew. But the preseason and training camp really kind of focused in that they're going to be aggressive. They're going to be playing downhill. And of course, you know, Kenneth Murray kind of alluded to that a while back, but, you know, really seeing it in person, it was very impressive. Even Nick Neiman and Eamon Ogbongbemiga got to be aggressive and blitz and play downhill and do all these things. So it seems like the linebackers are going to be more of a playmaking role as opposed to kind of the cleanup role, which is what we are used to over the last few years with Gus Bradley. So that necessarily didn't like change my mind, but it really kind of, gave me a new lens of how the linebackers are going to be used this year for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say the biggest thing that changed for me is how I feel about the preseason, and specifically how I feel about the offseason as a whole with Staley's program, right? The Chargers are entering the season as the healthiest team, and I think that is somewhat intentional with what they've done. Cross your fingers. But, for me, when we started the preseason, I was like, you know what? I want Herbert to play a drive. I want Herbert to play a series, maybe even a quarter, right? And see Eckler out there for at least a drive, maybe a quarter, same thing. But I think after seeing how this preseason played out, where you had a lot of guys like Larry Roundtree and all of the rookies kind of get their experience share and get everything that they needed out of this preseason. Plus, none of your top line guys are really hurt right now. And then you compare that to, the Ravens going hard in every preseason game, and J.K. Dobbins is now out for the season, unfortunately, right? So, obviously a lot of it is luck, just because someone tears their ACL or does the knee doesn't mean that wouldn't have happened before, right? Derwin James hurt himself in a scrimmage, not a game. Same thing with Joey Bosa a couple of years ago. But I think the health and conditioning thing definitely changed my mind towards playing the starters in the preseason, just because, maybe this will be different after we see the first few regular season games. They always could look rough. That's always possible. But I think getting to week one healthy was just such a, goal that we hadn't seen this team at before, that it did sort of change my mind in the long term and how I'm going to think about, preseasons in the future, regardless of who the coach is, who the GM is, et cetera.
Yeah, assuming Ryan Smith still counts as part of that list, because I think it came out September 2nd, the Chargers have two players that are either on like the COVID list, IR, or NFI list, or PUP list. And the NFL average is 7.1, I believe, from that list. So I don't think I've ever remembered a year where the Chargers were not just healthy or kind of healthy, the healthiest team in the league. And I think most teams are, like I said, 7.1 average. Some teams are in like the 14, 15 guys on the injured reserve or whatever lists. So to see the Chargers there, I mean, yeah, Derwin James at 85% ready, 50% ready is still better than, no offense, Alohi Gilman 100% ready. And so just having Derwin James out there. And again, so it's been, I did the math, I did the calculation. It's like 1,200 something days since they drafted Derwin James. And for the first time ever, they're going to have Derwin James and Joey Bosa on the field in week one, since in 1,200 days since they've drafted him. And they're finally going to be able to do that, which is amazing. To Steven's point about the linebackers, I kind of assumed they would sort of be the weak part, or at least maybe the riskiest or most worrisome group because of the injuries, because all three of them either had a season-ending injury or suffered some sort of injuries or had off-season surgery. And so you couldn't really trust those guys. And that's kind of still true, but they are so much fun to watch. And I never thought that the defense, I thought would be so defensive back heavy, would just be so linebacker strong. Like now they are the playmakers. Now they are the spark in this defense. And sure, that'll change with injuries, but I didn't expect that. And that's just a huge credit to Staley with going, listen, right now, I don't have every defensive back that I want and need. I don't have John Johnson. I don't have what's the other guy's name?
Troy Hill.
Excuse me. I don't have these guys right now. Or maybe he thinks he does, but we haven't seen it yet. So what do I have? I have a lot of really good, fast, physical, athletic linebackers, and I'm going to use them. And you see that in the preseason, even with a bunch of backups, Nick Niemann, Amen Ogbongbemiga, Cole Christensen. I think they blitzed like 12 times in the preseason or something like that, which seems unheard of to me. And just showing that in the preseason, I'm so excited to see what they do with true elite athletes like Kenneth Murray, Kaiser White, Drew Tranquil. Not that Neiman and those guys aren't, but I mean like some real gosh dang starting linebackers. So can't wait to watch those guys. And what's changed for me is kind of tied into those linebackers. I did not expect the run defense to be as good as it currently is. Now, on the flip side, I'm worried about the offense rushing the ball a little bit because I thought they would be better, yet they've averaged 3.3 yards per attempt this preseason. Now, we have not seen the starters, And again, I guess like Alex, I would rather sit them and figure it out in the regular season, but I didn't get to see them, starters with the running backs, and the running backs can only go as well as the offensive line does. And so it's very hard to evaluate, who was kind of good, who was kind of because they didn't really get that fair crack. And then at the scrimmage, they averaged 1.9 yards per attempt with the starters. So I don't know. But again, that is a huge credit to the linebackers and the run defense as a whole. I thought that would be the weakness. I honestly think that could be their strength over pass coverage, which is insane to me. Granted, everybody stays healthy. But for right now, I did not expect the run defense to be as good as it currently looks. The linebackers look amazing. So that has definitely changed my mind. And yeah, that's the thing that changed my mind the most so far.
Yeah, that's a good call. And I think, this run defense, like it really is going to be one of their strengths. And you look at the guys that they have, like it makes sense. Like you have Linval Joseph, you have Justin Jones, you have Joey Bosa, you have Uchenna Nwosu, like all positive run defenders. And then you add, the linebackers and Derwin James and Chris Harris, who's a good run defender too. So, I mean, it makes sense that the pieces are finally coming together, but that's just what needed to happen. Like they had talent, they had the run defenders previous years, but it just never really came together. To the opposite side of that spectrum, though, I have definitely changed my mind about the Chargers pass rush because, like, in my head, I was picturing, kind of another leap from Uchenna Nwosu. I was picturing a breakout season from Jerry Tillery, but it seems like more and more that we hear and watch that Kyler Fackrell is going to be that secondary pass rusher, and that Justin Jones is going to be that defensive tackle at pass rushing presence. I still think that Jerry Tillery can kind of be that guy who takes a step forward, but Daniel Popper went as far to say that he thinks that Justin Jones is going to have 8 sacks this year. Now, I don't know the whole context of that conversation. I haven't listened to it yet. It could have been like a bold prediction kind of thing, and that's certainly what it seems like. But, Justin Jones has really been shining as a pass rusher, and I'm sure that makes Alex very happy to hear. And then I mentioned Chris Rumph earlier. Like, I was worried about this pass rushing depth, and now you have Kyler Fackrell kind of being the most disruptive pass rusher in preseason. You have Chris Rumph really flashing some very positive signs of development to the point where, he could play, 15 to 20 snaps a game and kind of take on that Uchenna Nwosu role as that like third pass rusher. So in a positive way, like Fackrell and Rumph were kind of like the biggest surprises for me. But I am a little bit concerned about Nwosu's role and kind of lack of development, if you will, as a pass rusher.
I will say, since I went with a positive and if I'm going to go with a negative now, I've changed my mind on the wide receiver group a little bit.
Okay.
Just because I don't think they're as deep as they previously were. The focus on special teams, I think, is apparent throughout the roster, but KJ Hill's basically not on this roster as a receiver, right? He's here as a punt returner. It doesn't sound like he's gonna line up at wide receiver a whole lot unless somebody gets injured. And then you have Keenan Allen, who missed, 2, really 3 games last year with a hamstring that was kind of nagging him. Not that I would call him injury prone because he had 3, full seasons before that, but he is getting a little bit older. Mike Williams has been in and out of the lineup. That's something that I think is going, and obviously didn't play any of this preseason, was also in and out of practice with a hip flexor. So that's something that we need to see. Like, this kind of needs to be a year where I don't think he needs to play all 16 games, but based on how they've constructed this receiving core, I think he at least needs to play 13 and 14 and, stay in the game the whole way through. Right. So that's definitely something to note. And, I'm not going to go too much big on the Tyron Johnson thing again, but I think the fact that they did cut him and now they have these 4 receivers, of which Jalen Guyton is sort of assuming that Tyron Johnson role where he's just kind of going to be your deep guy when they need speed on the field. If he goes down, now your wide receiver group is suddenly a lot slower. Josh Palmer is no slouch in terms of speed, but I don't think that he's really going to burn a guy downfield. Although it's nice to see the confidence that they have in Palmer pretty much as, your new wide receiver 3 after all those months of debate, the last 2 years on that kind of role. So I feel confident about Josh Palmer, but in terms of how the wide receiver group is currently constructed, I don't love it from a health standpoint, particularly with Mike Williams, and particularly because it really, to me, does hinge on Guyton in terms of speed. Also, he has had issues dropping the ball, and a lot of the reporters have noted that he still had those same issues so far in training camp. So I would say I'm less positive on the wide receiver group, because originally when we did do that 53-man roster prediction, I called it the deepest position on the roster. I don't quite feel that way anymore.
And I don't really blame you. I mean, they're basically only keeping 4 wide receivers on the roster, and then punt returner is just another designation for the 5th guy. Like, they're really only keeping 4 wide receivers. Again, very, very strange move. I get it. I just don't know if I buy it all the way. I guess then in that same vein, I've sort of changed my mind on Jalen Guyton. I really thought that they could have brought in, well, Johnson or Palmer or somebody else to replace him as wide receiver 3. I'm going to be the guy that just says I think he is a deserving, rightful wide receiver 3 at this time. And I didn't think I would say that, but I don't. At the early in training camp, I think the first day he had a drop or two, and it's like, here we go again. But I really think he's just established himself as a pretty solid option. And maybe I don't know if biased is the right word, but having watched the scrimmage live, that is in my head. I can't get that out of my head. Just how effective he was, how explosive he was on 3rd and short. He was a go-to target. On deep passes, he was a go-to target. Intermediate, he was a go-to target. And I just didn't expect that from him. He's come a lot further. Again, like we talk about development, and not everyone, but a lot of people on social media, when I talk about Guyton, say, oh, well, he's the guy that dropped a lot of balls last year. He's the guy who can't run routes. All he does is run straight. But I really think the guy has evolved. So I've gone from basically thinking that 2 or 3 guys could replace him to I'm going to be potentially being the guy who champions him as wide receiver 3. And I don't mean that he can never be replaced or, upseated by, Josh Palmer at some point. But for right now, I do think he is their best option. So good for him. He really changed my mind over the course of the offseason because he's really stepped up. And I did not expect that from him because I really thought he was just going to be the same, body catcher, straight line guy that he really was projected to be. But he's taken a nice step forward. And obviously, because Tyron Johnson is no longer on the roster.
Yeah, to the Chargers, to the point of the deep receiver room, like I think we did see that in training camp, right? Like Mike Williams is down, and you see Jason Moore kind of being out there and taking that step forward. And of course, Josh Palmer's development has been a huge help to that as well as Jalen Guyton's. And I do agree, like, I was definitely, championing Tyron Johnson as to be that guy. And obviously I still wish he made the roster, but this team really likes Jalen Guyton, and he has earned a role, and he had, like Tyler said, he really has improved. So, I'm a little cautiously optimistic still because I am still worried about the drops, rearing the head there and, having some negative impacts in games. But Jalen Guyton does definitely deserve some praise for how he has improved. All right, to put a bow on this, obviously there's been a ton of buzz and praise about the defense. There's been a ton of buzz and praise about Brandon Staley, but I kind of want to put a bow on this about Joe Lombardi, and not necessarily if he's changed our mind, but what have we learned and what has our impressions been of the way that he is kind of handling this second chance as an offensive coordinator. And I think that's kind of, like I said, different conversation of if he's changed our mind or not, but Alex, we'll start with you. What have you kind of learned about the way that Joe Lombardi is going to be doing things? And do you think we'll be changing our minds eventually about the hiring of Joe Lombardi?
To be honest, I feel like I haven't learned anything about Joe Lombardi this whole time.
Okay.
And that's partially because of how the Chargers constructed the preseason, right? Because they were like, okay,
Sure.
here's Chase Daniel and Easton Stick, and they'll do some stuff. But, not having your quarterback out there in terms of your offense and constructing it, like obviously they've been working on it and making Herbert the system, as they've said a lot of times. But I actually just don't know how he's going to do as a play caller. I didn't think the preseason was that inspiring. He did lead that kind of 20-yard drive in the Rams game, or, that 20-play drive, I should say, in the Rams game.
Yeah.
And, there were some moments there. Early in the Niners game, I thought he was okay, but really like the last 6 quarters of the preseason, the offense kind of stunk. But it's also because they were playing fewer and fewer guys on offense, right? You know, by the third preseason game, it was Michael Bandy, Tyron Johnson, and, you know, those were your really three receivers that you had.
And John Hurst. John Hurst was the other one.
Yeah, John Hurst. Right. So, like, you know, it's hard to gauge what Joe Lombardi's going to do with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Josh Palmer based on what he does with John Hurst and Michael Bandy. Right. So, like, I think that's hard. I think we have learned some things, right? They're obviously going to be very aggressive downfield and use Justin Herbert's arm and use his talent. But as a play-to-play, you know, kind of caller, I don't really know if I've learned much about Joe Lombardi just because he's not playing with the guys that he's supposed to play with. So I would say I'm undecided on Joe Lombardi. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I just don't know if we have enough information at this point to really say it one way or the other.
Yeah, I can't say I've learned as much as confirmed, I suppose. I think Joe Lombardi is doing, at least based on what I've seen in training camp and at the scrimmage, hard to tell in the preseason, obviously, but I think he's doing exactly what he was hired to do. Can I install a Shanahan run scheme? Yes. Can I make Justin Herbert the feature of this offense? Yes. Am I going to throw it more? Uh-huh. Am I going to spread it to all my receivers and all my tight ends? Yes. So I think right now he's just doing everything that he's supposed to do. As far as the creativity or the effectiveness of these calls remains to be seen. We'll find out very, very soon this season. But for right now, I do think he's doing everything that he's supposed to do. There's no real surprise here. Everything looks as expected in terms of what they're trying to do, which is good. They want Herbert to bootleg. They want to run outside zone. They want to run a lot of play action. They're going to get the ball to their running backs and all their receivers and all their different weapons. We're not just going to run up the middle. You know, the calls have been, maybe not in the preseason, but I do think during the scrimmage and training camp, the calls have been varied for sure. I think different guys are moving different ways. I don't remember Justin Jackson being, you know, such a receiver in slot or on the outside. Eckler slot outside, Parham slot outside, Anderson in the backfield, inline tight end or outside. Gabe Neighbors is running on the outside now. There's just so many different looks. Again, whether it works or not, I don't know. But so far, it looks like they're trying to make a complex offense built off some really, really great principles, and they're getting it to their best players. And it's in the hands of their really smart quarterback. So right now, that didn't really teach me anything, but at least confirms that he's doing his job. And it looks like they're going to be exactly what they were supposed to be when they hired him.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I think both of you guys really summed it up. I'm still cautiously optimistic, like Alex said. But I do think that he's kind of, you know, like met expectations to this point. And the biggest thing that we all wanted to see from him is that he would be able to come into a new situation and be a collaborator, because that was kind of the critique of his time at Detroit. Again, if you listen to our conversation with Jeff Duncan or read Jeff Duncan's book or listen to Dan Orlovsky talk about the situation, it was just not a good philosophical or cultural fit between Joe Lombardi and Jim Caldwell, because Jim Caldwell was very strict. He wanted Joe Lombardi to be doing what he wanted him to be doing. And that's just like, some people are okay being yes men and other people aren't. And, you know, so I wanted to see the way that Joe Lombardi was going to come in and collaborate. And if it was like going to be, okay, we're just running the Saints offense. Like, this is what I know. This is what we're going to be doing. But then you read, you know, Robert Mays' article, which I referenced earlier, and, you know, they're doing a lot of RPO stuff, which we see a little bit Easton Stick. And that makes sense, right? Like, you watch Justin Herbert at Oregon, and he's very comfortable doing RPO stuff. It lets the team use his legs as a threat. That makes sense. Like, we wanted to see more of that last year. And then, you know, you want to see him kind of use Justin Herbert and expand their game in terms of the intermediate range. And that's what we've seen. A lot of tight end stuff in the flats, a lot of tight end stuff, you know, in the kind of the deep outs, and as well as Josh Palmer. So everything we're hearing just kind of makes sense. But I do agree with Alex. Like, we have to be cautiously optimistic still, because we didn't really see much of it. Like, we saw the one drive against the Rams, a few drives against the Niners when Filer and Ibushi were in there, where it was like, okay, you can see kind of glimpses of what they want to do. But it's tough when you have, you know, Darius Harper and Trey Pipkins as your tackles, and, you know, all the backups and stuff like that. Darius Badwell's the running back. And so I do agree. It's definitely cautious optimism at this point. Cool. All right. Love the awkward silences. All right, let's wrap up today's show by kind of sorting the AFC into tiers. Of course, our previous episode, we did give our playoff picks and Super Bowl predictions. But I'm a big fan of doing tiers, and this was actually Alex's idea, so I'm glad that he brought this up. So I'll let Alex go first here. We're going to be sorting AFC teams into the following tiers: Super Bowl contenders, playoff contenders. If a few things go right, potentially playoff contenders. Alex said bad, but still tough. And then Texans. So, Alex, I'll let you kick this conversation off. How do you have the AFC sorted out into those tiers?
Yeah, so I think the Super Bowl contenders right off the top are the three teams that we'll talk about the whole season, really. It's the Chiefs, Bills, and the Browns. I think there's an argument for the Ravens to be in here if the offensive line is okay. And obviously, if Gus Edwards is a serviceable replacement for J.K. Dobbins. But for now, I have those three teams kind of locked into that tier. Not a whole lot needs to be explained. I mean, the Chiefs and the Bills are what they are with their star quarterbacks. The Browns have a nasty defense and a pretty solid offense with Baker Mayfield and all the weapons there. Playoff contenders, I do have the Ravens, Titans, Patriots, and Chargers in that tier. The Ravens are kind of just outside the Super Bowl tier, so to me, like, they can definitely fluctuate upwards. The Titans I have in the playoff tier. I want to see what they are with Arthur Smith before we get into real contender territory with them. I just kind of need to see what their passing offense is going to be like. The Patriots are there, I think, just because they have a really high floor. They're not going to be a 4-12 or 4-13 kind of team. They're not going to bottom out. They have a really solid defense. They have got their offense more weapons in free agency, right? So I think that, bringing along Mac Jones there will be fairly easy to do. And I don't think he'll have to play the hero ball that Zach Wilson or Trevor Lawrence will have to play with their teams. So I think that they made it easy on him. And because of that, they're going to have a relatively high floor. The Chargers are there. I mean, we've all talked about, what this team can be, in which the ceiling is the Super Bowl and the floor is, probably 7-10, right? Like, that's sort of what we talk about this team like. So, obviously you see Derwin James and Joey Bosa and Justin Herbert and what this team can be. But, first year head coach, definitely some question marks. So that's why I, would not put them in a Super Bowl contending tier yet, just because there is a high variance between what they can be and what they might be given injuries and all that stuff. So I have them in playoff contender tier. The if a few things go right tier is made up by the Colts, Steelers, Broncos, and Dolphins for me. Just a kind of quick summary on all these teams. I think the Colts are good in some instances, but what their offense is going to be is heavily reliant on what Carson Wentz is going to be. Right. They just lost T.Y. Hilton, and their offensive line situation now is not great. I think if they get quite a few breaks in terms of health, they'll be okay. But they don't really have an offensive player that I would love that carries the offense for them. I think Jonathan Taylor is good, and they have that kind of deep running back by rotation committee. But to me, I think they need a little bit more than Mike Pittman and Zach Pascal sort of carrying the offense on the outside. So I'll be curious to see what they do. Steelers, Broncos, and Dolphins. Broncos really hinge on what level of play Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock end up giving them. I think that they can certainly move up the tiers based on how that defense is. But, the quarterback is the question mark. Dolphins, same thing. I mean, I think they have a really solid team, and they were one game away from the playoffs last season. But 2 is the question mark, right? If he develops further and has that breakout season, then the Dolphins can easily put themselves maybe even a high Super Bowl contention. I don't think that'd be crazy. And the Steelers depend on, what Big Ben is. So to me, that's really how that kind of breaks down in that tier. The bad but still tough tier, I really just tough is an exaggeration, but I did kind of mean that to say you can't automatically cross that team off to be a W during the season. So I have the Jets, Raiders, and Bengals in that tier. So the Jets have Zach Wilson, and I do like Robert Saleh, as well as, what that new offense is going to be. So that's kind of going to be interesting to watch. I really like what they did in the draft. And obviously they have Mike LaFleur there to kind of open up the Shanahan system, if you will. The Raiders, not good defensively, and that's the one thing that I think will hold them back. They also have a terrible football coach, so that's something that will hold you back as well. But because they have Derek Carr, he played pretty well last year. They have Darren Waller, and they have some weapons that I think will keep them in games, like Josh Jacobs as well. The Bengals I put in this tier as well. I think there can be an argument for them to be in the Texans tier, just based on the fact that they're still rebuilding. But if Joe Burrow is healthy, I think that they could get to maybe 5 or 6 wins. I don't think that's a crazy outlook for them. They're pretty deep at receiver now with T. Higgins and Boyd and Jamar Chase. So, they have some weapons to kind of spread the field on offense. Defense and offensive line, still a work in progress, but right. I think that they'll be better than they were last year. And in the Texans tier, this was originally just supposed to be for the Texans. But I think the Jaguars are so bad now that they've entered the Texans tier with Urban Meyer. That's a huge question mark. I don't know how he's going to coach this year and adapt to the NFL game. But also now Travis Etienne is out, and that was such a huge part of their plan. I think James Robinson can step in fine, but I'm curious to see what Darrell Bevell and Urban Meyer do there to kind of mitigate some of their losses and injuries. So, and obviously the Texans come in last. That's, kind of the most unfortunate situation in the NFL. Obviously, Tyrod is probably going to be the starter there because of the Deshaun Watson situation that's going on. And they have a first-time head coach in David Culley, who didn't have like a ton of experience doing what they really want him to do now as a head coach. So there's a lot of concerns there. The roster is very bare bones, and a bunch of guys that they like signed to 1-year, $2 million deals, like Desmond King and a bunch of other guys that were sort of rejected by other teams. So there is a bit of like a last chance you feel with that team, where they just have all these guys that are like, kind of trying to prove that they still belong in the NFL and can play. And they got some guys like Kiki QT, who's like, all right, he's interesting. They drafted Davis Mills, but they just got him. Wow. Yeah. All right. So they have less good things on their football team than I thought before. Yeah, I don't know.
They have Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is about it.
Yeah, that's about it. They're just this weird amalgamation of, kind of going one way. I mean, really, their future will not be clear until this Deshaun Watson thing is solved. And so that has really just skyrocketed this team directly into the cellar.
Very nice. All right, I'll jump into mine. Some obviously very similar. So the Super Bowl contenders, Chiefs, Bills, Browns. I don't think that's really debatable. For me, the playoff contenders is where I differ from you. I do have the Ravens there, but I also have the Steelers there. I'm going to consider them playoff contenders until they aren't. They have not had a losing record since 2003. So I think they're going to be just fine. I don't think they're going to necessarily push for a Super Bowl by any means, but I think they're playoff contenders for sure. And listen, they have Najee Harris on their team. I don't know if you knew that, Alex, but I took him first overall in the fantasy football draft.
No one cares about your fantasy football team.
You do, because you gave me that first pick. Anyway, so I do have the Steelers there as a playoff contender with the Chargers, Titans, Patriots, and Ravens. Ravens, I think, of all of these teams, are the ones who could bump up to Super Bowl contender the most. I just need to see a little bit from them with that new rushing attack, because unfortunately, also like fantasy, I lost Dobbins for the year. So there's that. The Chargers probably have the most variance in that group. I think they are firmly playoff contenders. They could also be an absolute disaster, but considering everything that's happened so far, I'm less likely to believe they're a disaster because they are currently healthy. And then, so I do think playoff contender is solid. We all had them as a wild card team. I think that makes sense. Could be, if everything goes right, that tier goes to the Broncos, Colts, and Dolphins. I sort of wanted to put the Raiders there because I do think their offense is going to be good. As much crap as we give John Gruden, the guy who taught Sean Payton everything is John Gruden. The guy who taught Joe Lombardi everything is Sean Payton. So there's a lot of John Gruden things in this Chargers offense. So I think we should respect him there. And they do have a decent offense. Josh Jacobs is still kind of dynamic, I think, but I traded him anyway to Alex's fantasy team. So you can hang out with that. And the Jets, I like what they did in the draft. I think in a separate universe, the duo of Elijah Vera Tucker and then Elijah Moore would be a solid draft for the Chargers. That didn't happen, obviously. Very happy with how the Chargers draft turned out, but I do like that group. I do have in the Texans group the same two, the Jaguars and the Texans. I think those two teams are pretty bad. The Texans are pretty awful. I've never seen a team so dysfunctional through every level of the franchise for one season. Hopefully that gets turned around because there are some good players in that team who deserve more than that, but it's a disaster. The Jaguars are definitely a dumpster fire. They kind of were anyway, unfortunately for Trevor Lawrence. Sometimes being picked number 1 overall isn't the best thing ever, despite the fact that you get a fat contract. I do have a tier below that, though, and I'm going to put the Cincinnati Bengals in that tier. And the tier is called morons because I was appalled that they currently have a receiver they took in the first round that apparently can't catch. Now, I do believe he'll do fine. That's why, hey, look, another fantasy reference. That's why I drafted him in fantasy football. But I'm going to call them morons because they passed on Penei Sewell. And because they passed on Penei Sewell, they now have Sewell with the Detroit Lions, where he's currently being forced to play right tackle, which is an absolute disaster so far and a complete travesty for a generational tackle who was amazing at left tackle, and they should have kept him there. But now he's into Detroit. He's in freaking Detroit playing right tackle for Anthony Lynn. That's horrific. I feel so bad for him, so I'm blaming the Bengals for that. And they also could have had Elijah Moore in the second round, but instead they went with Jackson Carman, who I believe isn't even starting yet and was injured for part of the season. So my disdain for the Bengals has grown because of what they did to Penei Sewell and because they did the opposite of what I'd like the Chargers to do, which is go with a skill position player and then dress the offensive line later on. But that's why they're in the moron tier. And I hope that the Chargers beat them because I really need to delete this video if they don't.
Really quick before I give mine, Alex, I know you want to respond about John Gruden.
Oh, no. I mean, I just think, do I have to respect John Gruden? Yes, I respect that he got $100 million from Mark Davis. That's what I respect about him. Other than that, he's been a complete failure. They go on 19-29, and he's worse than Jack Del Rio. Thank you.
Well, I blame the defense for that, not the offensive mind. And I bet you he puts cards back.
Yeah. All right. So for my playoff tiers or AFC tiers, excuse me, I have Chiefs, Bills, Browns as the Super Bowl. And then playoff, I have the Ravens, Titans, Chargers, and Steelers. I think the Titans, I don't necessarily like put them in that same tier of team, but I just think like they're a lock to win their division. So like they are a playoff team kind of by default. Like Alex was saying, I need to see how that offense comes together without Arthur Smith. But more importantly, I don't like many of their defensive players. Like Bud Dupree is a solid secondary pass rusher, and I think Jeffrey Simmons is a really, really good defensive tackle. But that's like about it. They have Caleb Farley, who really needs to prove that he can stay healthy at corner, and they have Janoris Jenkins opposite of him. And Jenkins hasn't been good for like 4 years. So outside of Simmons and maybe their safety, I forget his first name, but Bayard is his last name. There isn't really a whole lot on defense. And that defense has kind of been a mess, which is really surprising because Mike Vrabel is a defensive guy. Like that's why he got hired. So I just need to see more out of them. But I have the Colts in the next tier because I have no idea if they're going to stay healthy. I have no idea who's going to get COVID or not. Like their 4 or 5 most vocal leaders have all come out and said that they are not vaccinated and are not planning to get vaccinated. So the Colts are a solid franchise, but their window of variance is very similar to the Chargers this year, where like if they won 5 games and Carson Wentz didn't play and Darius Leonard missed a few games with COVID and Quentin Nelson didn't play, like I wouldn't be all that surprised. And of course, Eric Fisher is coming back from an Achilles injury. So the Colts could certainly, like if things go right and Carson Wentz does, be the quarterback that they need him to be, sure, they can make the playoffs. But it could also, like shit could also hit the fan really quickly and they could be really bad again. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Colts. The Patriots are in that if a few things go right tier because I still am skeptical of Mac Jones kind of being a consistent quarterback from a week-to-week basis who can win them games. I think the rest of their roster is solid. Their front 7 is nasty with Matthew Judon and Josh Uche, but their secondary is really kind of full of older players. Stephon Gilmore is not healthy right now. So there are definitely some things that I think could go wrong for them that would kind of force them out of the playoffs. And of course, they're in the same conference or same division as the Bills and the Dolphins. So I'm kind of wait and see with the Patriots still. Also in that tier, I have the Dolphins, similar kind of thing. I'm a big believer in Tua and what he'll be able to do this year, but we need to see it first. And, Will Fuller is suspended to start the year. So you have Jalen Waddle. Devontae Parker is injured right now. And, we kind of give a lot of crap to the Bengals for what they've done with the offensive line, but the Dolphins don't really have a very good offensive either. I liked Jackson is kind of like that, fifth, sixth tackle last year. He hasn't been very good. They're playing Liam Eichenberg at guard, which I don't really like.
Yeah. Who decided on that one?
Yeah, so initially, like in the spring, they said that Robert Hunt was going to be playing guard and Liam Eichenberg was going to be playing right tackle. And now it's the other way around. Robert Hunt is playing right tackle and Liam Eichenberg is playing guard. So I'm just very skeptical of the offensive line. I don't like any of their running backs. I think, Myles Gaskin is okay, but the defense is solid. They're going to be very well coached, and so they'll be very competitive, but I need to see more. And then the Broncos are in that tier as well. I'm not going to talk about them because we all know why. I think the Raiders are close to this kind of tier. Like Tyler, I kind of agree there, but I'm not going to put them there. I just think with the offense, with Derek Carr, Darren Waller, and kind of the rest of the pieces, I think they'll be competitive in every game. I just don't buy their ability to close out games, especially with the defense, which Mike Clay for ESPN has them projected as the second worst defense in the league in terms of points given up, which is going to be fun to watch. Also in that tier, I have the Jets and the Bengals. I do think the Jets are kind of stepping in the right direction. Joe Douglas, I think, is doing a really good job kind of building up that team. Their offensive line is going to be pretty solid with Mekhi Becton, Elijah Vera Tucker, and George Fant, who's a tackle. So I like a lot of parts of them. They're going to miss Carl Lawson for sure. That defense is going to struggle to kind of get after quarterbacks. But I think they'll be a competitive 5-12, 6-11 kind of team. And then the Bengals are in that tier as well. And then Texans, Jaguars, both going to be pretty bad. The Jaguars, I think really Urban just kind of underestimated how bad that roster is. And how hard it was going to be kind of rebuilding that from the studs up because, they really have outside of Trevor Lawrence, I don't know who their long-term building blocks are. I think they have a good left tackle. I forget his name right now. And Josh Allen, the pass rusher, is okay, but that's it in terms of long-term building blocks. And, they took his buddy, they took Trevor Lawrence's buddy at the running back in the first round. And that was cool. But they needed help at several other positions. And it was why are you taking a running back? So the roster decisions have been confusing. Hiring failed coordinators in Seattle was confusing. So it's going to be tough there. I think it sucks that both those teams are in the same division, but one of them is going to get at least one win this year, but there's a good chance that both of these teams are kind of 1-16, 2-15 kind of range, which is awful to watch. So those are my tiers.
Very nice. Which of the crap teams has the best shot of being decent or making a push?
That includes the bad but still tough tier.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's the Raiders. I think it's pretty clearly the Raiders. I think they have a lot of question marks and the defense is certainly bad, but I think they have enough with Yannick Ngakoue and Gerald McCoy, and now they signed KJ Wright and Max Crosby. So I think they have enough pass rushers to kind of keep games close. And I think their offense, is certainly going to be top tier or middle tier, I should say. So I think the Raiders would certainly be, that 8-9 and 8 kind of team.
Yeah.
I'll take the Jets from that tier. I really like what Salah is kind of doing there. And obviously you have the Mike LaFleur, who is kind of going to work really well, I think, with Zach Wilson. I don't think that they have the talent the Raiders do, which is why I hesitate to say this. But I do kind of think that Zach Wilson's hero ball can kind of win you more games, maybe than Sam Darnold's approach. Obviously, the lack of weapons and this is still kind of a rebuild will hold them back. But Wouldn't shock me if they got to 7-8 wins. I wouldn't be stunned by that outcome. I wouldn't expect them to go any higher than that, but I would say their ceiling is a little bit higher than some of those other teams.
Just really quick before Tyler jumps in here, the Jets' schedule is actually pretty manageable. They play, they get the AFC South as kind of their thing, so they'll get 2 free wins against the Jaguars and the Texans. You know, they play the Eagles too, the Broncos. They play the Colts. So if the Colts are kind of a mess, that could be a win for them. They play the Broncos, Panthers, Falcons. So there definitely is a pathway for the Jets to win 7-8 games.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, good. All right, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
No, I have nothing to add.
No thoughts.
Great. Sounds good. This has been a fun episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, make sure and smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, leave us a rating or review on the audio platform of your choice. We do really appreciate that. This has been the Guilty as Charged podcast, and we are signing off.